Hello everyone! Thanks again to those who are helping out on Patreon. The links are here and down below in the thingy. Once again, the questions are marked out on the YouTube timeline, so if there's a question in which you have a particular interest, feel free to skip ahead. In today's episode, we'll be...
Hey, green screen Franklin.
Yeah?
We actually don't need you. We're here on location.
Really?
Yeah, as a society, we're all pretending the pandemic's over.
Alright.
So we're going to talk to Rabbi Edery, so, play the intro.
Okay, well, I hope you enjoyed the interview, and make sure you stick around for the end where I talk about two things you probably didn't know.
That is a highly controversial topic.
It's not quite moral, but it is a theological explanation.
The idea of like apocalyptic literature is not that it's to be interpreted in necessarily a literal sense.
Yeah, I'm impressed by your very thorough research.
I just started thinking about this because, as you might imagine, nobody's ever asked me in church about Judaism.
That's a fascinating philosophical discussion.
I think it's important to talk to them and find out what they believe. Let's start this off talking about Torah.
Before I open, I'd like to tell you, this is what makes a synagogue a synagogue. Because if you look at the building, and you can look at 100 synagogues, all different, it's just a building. This is what makes this actually a synagogue, that we have the ark. And of course, in the ark, everybody can create an ark in a different way. There are no specific requirements. This is a beautiful ark made here by a woodworker in Carolina. So when we built this sanctuary, we wanted to do something that reflected a little bit of where we are. So it's all of the wood and all that. What all arks have in common is that what we have inside is scrolls of Torah. Right? So it's called the Aron HaKodesh, the Ark of the Holy. So we have the scrolls of Torah. As you can see, we have 3 scrolls of Torah. We also use it, for example, to house a shofar that we have, that it's blown at some holidays. We have another scroll. This is the scroll of Esther that we read in Purim. And so all these holy things that we use for our services. These scrolls are identical in the text. So the text is exactly the same. The first 5 books in your Bible, from Genesis to Deuteronomy, this is the Torah, exactly identical. They're all handwritten by a scribe. And handwriting, even if you try to do very nice print and all that, it's different. Some may be bigger, some a little smaller, and this and all that. However, the tradition is that you will see this is a long parchment and it has columns. The columns will be exactly the same in each Torah. Like the first word of the column and the last word of the column will be the same. So each Torah matches the next. We try, and I think Jewish communities try to somehow make things beautiful. You can have a scroll and make it pretty simple, and you can beautify it. And if you can, let's do it. That shows also, your love for your tradition. So typically, all these have different mantles that are mostly for protection, for covering, but there's an opportunity. People pick purple. Somebody thought purple is the perfect color, probably biblical origins, and golden little embroidery. The typical theme that you see, for example, here is like this crown. This is called a breastplate. That is just a decoration. And the interesting thing is, some of that may be based on what the ancient high priest in the temple used to wear. In the temple, if you look at the Bible and this, the high priest, which was the chief of all the priests, had to wear a breastplate, not exactly in this way. He had a special high hat. He had to wear some belts as he was walking, all kinds of things. Well, we don't have a high priest anymore, and we don't have that temple. So some of that was transferred to our Torah. This, for example, that we have here, it's called a rimon. A rimon is a pomegranate. And you can see this is a beautiful artistic creation of a pomegranate. And this is a typical way, in different shapes, that is used as a decoration. So when you carry the Torah, this is resemble the bells that the high priest would have. This is a very precious thing. A parchment is something that is expensive, difficult to make even today. And 2,000 years ago is an extremely valuable. To write the Torah takes a special talent. You need a scribe that with a feather and some ink painstakingly doing each letter. It takes maybe close to a year, 10 months for somebody to do this. So this is a very, very precious, but also very fragile thing. So the way to protect it is that when we read it, we try not to touch the side where all the letters are. So to keep the line, we have a pointer. And instead of using my finger, we're using this, which is called the yad. And, different shapes and sizes. And it's a personal thing. For example, our sixth graders come to Sunday school. One of the projects they do some Sundays is they create their own yad with beads and all kinds of things. And maybe they use it for bar or bat mitzvah. If you think this will be a text, a quote about God or faith or something like that, no, that's not what it is. This is a gift to remember the spirit of Mr. Joseph Stroim from his beloved wife, Johanna, and this is the year when this was given. And again, this is not used for like studying purposes. If I have a Bible study group, we open a book, right? Which is more practical. For ritual purposes, for ceremonies, for religious services, for holidays, this is when we read from Torah. You see, there are no chapters. There's no books, there are no numbers. The division of all this in chapters did not exist for centuries. It was actually done by earlier Christian priests to make it easier to quote and to find some section. Okay? So there's no division on chapters or anything. And sometimes there's no distinction between when a sentence ends and the next begins. It's all running text. So this is why when you read this, you probably have to practice before and know the text, so then you can read it. Typically in congregation, this is chanted. It's not just read, it's chanted, and there's very traditional melodies to do that. When we open this is what we read actually last week. We're in the, as you can see, almost the middle of it. So we're in the third of the 5 books, the book of Leviticus, the book of Vayikra. And this is chapter 19 begins here. And I'll read one line. וידבר אדוני אל משה לאמור, דבר אל כל עדת בני ישראל, ואמרת עליהם, קדושים תהיו, כי קדוש אני, אדוני אלוהיכם. And this is when God says to the people of Israel through Moses, you shall be holy, just like I am holy. And to me, it's a remarkable text because usually most religious texts and ideas is we are nothing and we're flawed and we are small and holy are the things that we can never attain. And this is God saying, you got it wrong. You can be holy. You should do something and be holy just like me. And then, of course, it's a long list of how you do that, including paying your workers on time, honoring parents, feeding the foreigner, not getting every single piece of crops from your field by leaving it for those who are hungry, and eventually all kinds of beautiful things here. And the last line, which is, Ve'ahavta lereacha kamocha, love your neighbor as yourself, or love for your neighbor what you love for yourself. The golden rule. The golden rule, exactly right there.
Hello and welcome to the What They Believe series. Today I'm speaking with Rabbi Edery here at Temple Beth Shalom. Rabbi Edery, thank you for joining us again.
It's a pleasure to join you again, Frank.
I'm a little confused about Reform Judaism. When it comes to a religion, it's their beliefs and their rules that how I normally define them. Your beliefs tend to fall in line with every other sect of Judaism I know of. However, the rules seem a little bit nebulous. Of the mitzvot that can still be followed, how many of them would still apply to Reform Judaism?
The Reform movement makes a distinction between a rule, the letter of a rule, and the purpose of the rule. And specifically because we're talking about rules sometimes written 3,000 years ago, in the Iron Age, before there was any science and things like that, we think, and also when society was different, when society was agricultural and all kinds of things, some of the rules may have served a purpose when they were given, but if you continue to do the same thing, it doesn't serve any purpose anymore. And actually, maybe keeping the rules maybe even backfire and be against the original purpose of the rule. So I'll give you a very simple, trivial example. In the Torah, there's all kinds of rules about debts being forgiven every 7th year. It's one of the beautiful things, the sabbatical year, and every debt is canceled, and everybody goes back to their land, and we keep a beautiful agrarian society where everybody's equal. Well, there's a problem with that, which is when you move to a capitalistic society, and this is in the ancient world, when cities develop, if debts are canceled on the 7th year, and this is the 5th year, and you need a loan, I'm not giving it to you. So loans started being a problem, and capital and people who needed money to survive and to have a livelihood could not get them because that law that initially was meant to preserve equality and help everybody, it was actually hurting people. So what do? You keep the law. The Reformed tradition is the one that says very clearly, well, let's keep the purpose, let's keep the goal. Let's keep the idea for which we created the law. And if the law is not serving this idea of the idea can be served better, then let's adjust this law. All right? So in the Reform movement then, at one point specifically, the Reform movement made this distinction. They say there are some laws that we see in the Bible Jewish tradition that seem to have a clear ethical idea. Right? Don't steal, don't kill, help the poor. And others that seem purely ritual. The priest should slaughter a goat like this, and you should blow a shofar, and all kinds of rituals. And what the Reform movement said early on is the ethical is the same. People are people, and ethical behavior, that's something that stays with us forever. We might change a little bit of how we do it, but those are the same principles. Ritual. If you play guitar, or if you blow shofar, if you have a microphone, or if you speak, that really doesn't really matter that much. So the Reform movement embraced very quickly the idea that the ritual is there to serve the ethical. And so we have lots of leeway of making rituals that work for us, and those that don't, then we don't do them.
I've been asking all my guests recently if they believe we are currently in the end times. I'm certain your answer would be no. But I'd like to know about eschatology in Judaism. Is there an end of the world story?
The appeal of eschatology and the end of times completely escapes me. I don't understand why anybody will be thinking about those things, even though I know it's very common. I have a very hard time understanding eschatology and people who think that somehow this universe exists for 13 billion years, but in October of next year is gonna be over for some reason. As a child, I paid attention to that, but as soon as I turned 12, there were already 17 predictions of the end of times that didn't happen, so I learned to not pay attention to any of that because it's literally nonsense. In religious history, sometimes people are interested in this. In the Jewish world particularly, there was a group, and this is probably a group that existed most around Jesus' time, and I will say that probably Jesus belonged to that part of thing where this world ends and a new one begins, right? It's the kingdom of the Father or whatever it is. People in Jewish tradition also believe that this world is hard and harsh and difficult and unfair and unjust and lots of suffering. Why is God doing this to us? There must be an end to this, and there must be a time when Messiah comes, to put it in religious words, or days will be great, and the prophets talk about that day will come, and this and all that. Jewish tradition specifically insists, it's a Talmudic principle, do not try to calculate the end of times. Because everybody thinks the end of times is within their lifetime, right? And to me, that's just a measure of how desperate of how despondent we are with the situation in which the world is, that we say, we don't see a way forward. This better end soon. I know that the world's not going to end soon. We're going to ruin the planet first for several centuries before maybe we bring some end, but I don't think that that's anything that has, to me, any religious value to it.
You know, Jesus was not the Messiah, but there is a Messiah that will come, and I think ransom the captive Israel was the term, and that's when the third temple gets built.
Yeah, so I'll make a very, very long history short in 3 parts. One is, first of all, what's a Messiah? What are we talking about? So this is what we're talking about. One day, there was a kingdom of Israel and a kingdom of Judah, and one destroyed by the Assyrians, the other destroyed by the Babylonians. And then one day, the last king of Israel, the dynasty of David, lasted probably 500 years, right? And after 500 years, the last king of Israel is sent to exile, and some of the family killed by the Babylonians, right? So what do we do now? Well, it's the end of the Jewish people, the end of all this. Or somebody, like some of the prophets, which were some religious figures at the time, started saying, no, wait a minute. This is like a tree that was kind of cut almost to the bottom and this, but it's still alive. And a new shoot will come, literally. That's what the prophets say, right? There will be a rebirth to this tree. This tree is not completely dead. And you know that Davidic dynasty of kings that God chose, they still will have children, and one of their children will be anointed as king. Anointed is when you put oil in your head, and this is how in the ancient world you will make somebody king. That's the word Mashiach. Mashiach means anointed, right? Doesn't mean savior, doesn't mean son of God, doesn't mean anything other than anointed, the person who is designated to be the next king. Now, for many centuries, that gave Jews lots of hope. Oh, eventually will be. Now, we live about 2,500 years after that. I don't wish to have a king being appointed just because his great-grandfather was David, right? So I don't expect a king anymore, like those people in the Bible did. Now, so the Jewish world moved this to something a little more grandiose. Okay, so we forgot about the king and this and all that. Now we're thinking about somebody's going to come and not only bring the exiles back to Israel, not only kick the foreigners out and reestablish the kingdom of David, also will bring peace to the world, and everybody will embrace God, and everything will be wonderful. And as the prophets say, you know, the lion will lie down with the lamb and everybody will live in peace, right? Now, that's a beautiful vision, but it's almost like a utopian vision, right, of a future that we strive for. That would, for most Jews, modern Jews, even beyond Reform Judaism, that's what we think when we say, oh, Mashiach. I don't think of somebody who's going to come riding a donkey and become a king and start ruling, right? And making peace over all the world. I rather think of, hopefully, we can get our act together so we get a society that is more just, more fair, more educated, more kind, and eventually we may have something that resembles that when we live peacefully with each other and with our neighbors. So that's, I'm hoping, what Reformed Jews will say for the Messianic era, right? Not for a Messiah.
You mentioned the destruction of the first temple and the second temple. Do you believe that they should pursue creating a third temple?
This may be shocking to many Jews, including many Reformed Jews perhaps. I think that the destruction of the temple, as tragic as it was one of the most important positive things that happened to the Jewish people in Jewish history. Because Jewish religion for the first 1,000 years was centered on a holy place, a holy temple, with priests, which were the sons of other priests, which will do all kinds of rituals. And there wasn't much of a religion at home, much of a religion in the community. There wasn't much of very developed religious morals and teachings, because everything was centered on, well, we do this at the temple. And what happened is what? once the temple is destroyed and there's no more that temple, what did Jews do? Well, we don't have that temple, but we can gather in a building like this. And what are we going to do here? We don't have priests. Well, some people may learn from our Bible and scriptures and religious idea, and they may teach. And we can come and pray. I don't need the priest to do things for me. I can pray. God can hear me. I have my direct access to God, just like everybody. And I don't need to be in that special, unique place. Wherever we get together, that's a special place. So this transformed Judaism into the religion that it is today. This is why we have synagogues. This is why we have rabbis. And the emphasis on rabbis and synagogue and Jewish religion is not so much what goat is going to be slaughtered and how you're going to do those rituals that occupy many pages in the Torah. But actually now the focus is how I'm going to do what we read a minute ago about try to be holy. How I'm going to try to imitate God, as so to speak, right? How I'm going to try to be kind to my neighbor. How I'm going to love my neighbor as myself. What a change from a common worship at a temple to actually embrace this religious life and come in a community to learn, discuss, and develop a community that joins you in this. So nobody needs that third temple except the people who are fundamentalists, Christian, Jewish, that think that if we only build that temple there in Jerusalem, maybe some great descendant of David will come, or maybe Jesus will come again, and somehow the world will be transformed. So I appreciate the goal to transform the world, but I don't think that that's the way.
In the last service I attended here at Beth Shalom, you made a side comment where you dismissed the idea of magic. So do you not believe in magic, including divine magic?
Well, that will be very disappointing to my wife, but I believe in some kinds of magic and not some others. And I'm basically cheating when I say this, because the real answer is no, I don't believe in magic, unless we use the magic of love, the magic of a flower blooming. Right? So there's lots of things that are wonderful beyond understanding. Right? Watch Animal Planet. Almost everything there to me is magical, is incredible. A frog that is frozen for a year and comes back to life and nobody even knows how they can do it. But I don't call that magic. You can call it magic if you want to say something that is extremely impressive and wonderful. But
so it's a magic in the poetic sense, like a sunset or a...
Exactly. And by the way, the sun only sets in a poetic sense because we know that really the sun is there and the earth is rotating, right? So we are the ones setting, not the sun, right? But of course, I understand what a sunset is. And I love a sunset and I like to be with my loved one at the beach and see, and I'm inspired and I move and I feel the magic in the air. But that's very different from magic that says that somebody or some people somehow can suspend the laws of nature and do something that violates everything we know about how the world works because they have some power to somehow cancel how the universe works for the sake of you or me, or if I have an amulet, or if I pray very hard, or something like that. That kind of magic, I think it's very childish. It's a childish belief. And I think as one evolves, I believe in magic when I was a kid, of course. And then I knew that my uncle, who was a magician, there were tricks. Right? Now, I appreciate a magician now because it takes enormous skill to make something look like magic. But again, I appreciate the skill, the talent. I don't confuse and I don't think that they have the ability to cancel the laws of nature for 10 minutes and then bring them back.
As you mentioned at the closing of your Passover service, your family is both Moroccan and Lithuanian. And you talked about the celebration of, is it Mimouna?
Yes.
I'm certain few people know about this holiday. Can you tell our audience what is Mimouna and what makes it different than other Jewish holidays?
It's almost a curiosity in Jewish history because there's, 3,000 years of Jewish history. Jews have lived literally on every place on earth. And this holiday is only a holiday for Jews from Morocco. So it's something that is completely autochthonous, indigenous. It just emerged in the Jews of Morocco, and nobody else does it. Right? And of course, when you look at the roots, you'll find that they're deeply Moroccan. Right? So Jews, especially outside of Europe, where Jews in Europe always were confined to ghettos and close and very much segregated from every European country until 100 years ago. When Jews live in other places, and mostly in the Muslim world, Jews were not that segregated. And they also came to share food and music and practices and beliefs and stories and culture with their Arab neighbors and with their Muslim neighbors. In Morocco, there is a strong popular belief, or there was particularly, centuries ago, strong popular belief in good luck, talking about magic, right? In amulets that can bring good luck, in all kinds of symbols that can help you have good luck and avoid bad luck. We all know the hamsa, the hand, sometimes has an eye because it wards off the evil eye, and the hand can give you luck, and some say you need to put it like this and not like that, and there's all kinds of things. There are colors that are good for luck, like the turquoise. So there's all kinds of things that people do. So Moroccan Jews somehow took some of this, of the Moroccan popular culture, and they embrace it for Passover, because Passover is spring. It's the rebirth of spring, and the good news, after years of slavery, now we're free. So Passover is all a very optimistic, positive, new year, new season, new crops. So they decided to end the holiday of Passover with a unique celebration, and it's a celebration to usher in the good luck. And so they will have a table with all kinds of symbolic things, like golden coins with some flour, and the head of a fish, or a full fish swimming, right? And all kinds of things that are just popular elements that bring good luck and joy and colorful and sweets and all those things. And what I love about that holiday is not so much the magical background of it, but a little more of that shows that Jews and Muslims, Jews and Arabs, like in Morocco, actually share together in that holiday. It was very common for Jews to have Muslim neighbors come and be part of that celebration and do that. So to me, that's why, by the way, today, currently in Morocco, there is one interfaith organization that specifically does things together with Jews and Muslims, and it's called the Mimouna Foundation. Right? So I thought that that's a beautiful way to show that we're not really an island, and we can share a lot in positive ways if we want.
Since we last met 2 years ago, which seems like 15 years ago, it's been a time of enormous change for our society. Have you noticed any changes in your own beliefs?
Perhaps not in general beliefs or fundamental beliefs, but there was an adjustment, and my adjustment was I did not know how important community is for a good life. I would have not predicted that not being able to gather with other people will drive thousands and hundreds of thousands, if not millions, to deep depression that will affect their personal health, physically, mentally, emotionally. So I did not know to what extent that will happen. I guess, yes, because we never had such a situation. And to me, pandemic maybe caused many consequences to pandemics, but a couple in terms of religious communities that I know also beyond Judaism too. I speak with my clergy friends, and it's the same. Some people lost the habit and the practice of gathering together in churches, and some who have to stay isolated are not really coming back. Same happened in Jewish communities. But some have experienced the opposite. They have found that this connection is so important, it's so essential, it's so important to connect with people, just to be with people, and especially if you're doing good and positive things, and you're singing and you're praying, and you're doing interfaith build and all kinds of good things. So for some people, these have taught us, this is more important than we thought it was. So I am on that side, where I think really community has a value that is enormous, and even more than I, who already valued community, thought it had.
Was there any holiday that took on a more important or a different meaning during the pandemic?
Well, to me, maybe following up on what I was saying, is actually Shabbat. If you ask most Jews which one is the most important holiday in Jewish tradition, people will say Yom Kippur, maybe Rosh Hashanah, the New Year, maybe Passover. Nobody will say Shabbat, because Shabbat happens every week, right? If you ask probably most rabbis, they will tell you Shabbat is the big holiday. And my father once put this in a good example. If you have a couple of friends in town, and you see one of them once or twice a year, but another one, you see them every week, every time you make sure you see them. Which one do you think is your best friend? So Shabbat is here every week, and that's why people take it for granted. But for me, it's essential. So for me, during pandemic, sometimes we did during most of the pandemic, I came here every Friday and every Shabbat to do services, and it was just like we're doing now. It was me, one other person, and the sound, the camera, and maybe somebody playing the piano, and that was it. It was very lonely. It was empty, and we connected through Zoom and all that. And for me, that Shabbat was a little bit of an island, because when I am an hour here and we're reading and singing, even connecting to Zoom, the word pandemic disappeared from my mind. Right? The isolation and all those things, they're gone, because I'm in this joint session, I'm thinking other thoughts, and so to me the weekly Shabbat became essential, and I credit that with a lot of helping me going through the pandemic and the health, and to be able to see how week after week we can still endure and we can still be there, and people had a hard week, but we can still support each other even through Zoom. It was wonderful, and so pandemic also made me appreciate the gift that Shabbat is, and getting together to celebrate every week.
I recently watched the movie The Frisco Kid for the first time, and brief summary of it, a young rabbi graduates from yeshiva and is going from Poland to San Francisco, bringing the Torah scrolls to the community there. At one part of the story, he has to choose between saving the Torah scrolls and saving a human life. Given that choice, what would your reaction be?
So there's one section of the Torah that is right there that says, God speaking to the people of Israel saying, these are all my commandments, all the mitzvot that a person shall do and live by them. Our rabbis say, what do you mean, and live by them? You should say, these are the commandments that everybody should do. What's the point of adding and live by them? So the rabbis understand that means live by them and not die for them. In Jewish tradition, from the very, very early beginning, nothing is more precious than a human life. Mine, yours, anybody's. Right? Nothing is more precious than a human life. We know from Genesis, the first story, God created the human in God's likeness and image. The human is divine. God breathed it in with the other story, right? The spirit. So we believe that a human life is really the thing with most value in this world. So any material thing, any object, anything cannot compare to the value of a human life. Even a holy object, even something that I think is one of the wonderful legacies that anybody has given to the world, that is the source of so many wonderful things that I appreciate so much, that I come here religiously to read and learn and teach. So I'll be probably crying if I have to abandon a Torah to, save a life, but the answer is very clear. I would save a life. And that will be my obligation as a Jew, because that's what the Torah actually tells me to do.
I'd like to thank Rabbi Edery for joining me here today. Actually, I joined him here today. Thank you, Rabbi.
Thank you. It's a pleasure, and I really appreciate this show that you do. I watch most of the chapters, and they're getting better all the time. and I can tell the love with which you do this, and it's very interesting. Thank you.
Thank you. Here's the thing. I had assumed that some things were always around. Or, more accurately, I had never given any thought that there must have been a first one. As long as there have been humans, there have been children. However, for most of that time, they did not have a place for them to play. Most children played in the street. The first public playground was built in Manchester, England in 1859. In the United States, it wasn't until the early 1900s that public playgrounds started to gain popularity. The reason, well, children played in the street, and the streets were now occupied by something more dangerous than a horse and carriage. In the United States, organizations such as the National Highway Protective Society highlighted the numbers of children killed by automobiles and urged the creation of playgrounds, aiming to free the streets for vehicles rather than children's play. So yes, public playgrounds exist due to cars. Here's the thing. What would you say if I told you I knew a nice villain? It would be a strange question, but in modern speech, a nice villain would be a polite, friendly, bad guy. The meanings of those words have changed over the years. Nice originally meant foolish or ignorant. It comes from two words, nai, meaning not, and scire, meaning to know. Villain is derived from the late Latin word villainous, which referred to those bound to the soil of a villa and worked on a plantation. Eventually, villain meant villager, which at the time was to refer to a lack of proper etiquette and conduct. So, if I were to call you a recumbent bogslagger, who knows what that would mean 100 years from now? Thanks for watching, and may the road rise with you.